A legendary Malay warrior of the 15th century was said to have rallied a cry.
Takkan Melayu hilang di dunia.
These words, believed to have been spoken by the legendary Malay warrior Hang Tuah, are forever etched in the Malay imagination. His weapon was the Keris, a dagger revered for its deadly and magical properties. Today, the Keris has survived over 5 centuries as a symbol of power and national pride for Malay people of all walks of life. As one of the oldest surviving objects of the Malay world, the Keris is much more than just a weapon. Each Keris is a key that grants us insights into the changing beliefs and traditions of a people. The Keris is a distinctive asymmetrical dagger indigenous to the Malay archipelago. Forged primarily from iron, the Keris was the weapon of choice amongst Malay warriors from around the 13th century. Much like the 6-shooters brandished by cowboys of the American frontier, a Malay man would rarely have been seen without his trusty Keris blade at his side.
Malay without Keris is just naked, like you naked. So every man during those days must wear Keris, even they are on their way to village or what.
To understand the significance of the Keris, one must first travel back in time to the days of the earliest Malay kingdoms.
From about 5,000 years ago, the Austronesian group moved from the north, from the Taiwan island, into the Philippines and into the Indonesian Malaysian archipelago. They were here settling down sometime around 3000, 2000 BC, and for that purpose they were already settled and having some agriculture. They have their boat construction and doing their fishing work, and at that time also they were settling along the coast of most of the island.
The culture of the Keris evolved out of the maritime kingdoms of the Indonesian islands of Java, Sumatra, and the Malay Peninsula, spreading to as far as the Philippines. These kingdoms formed an important part of the Malay world.
Malay world refers to an area from Madagascar right down to the Hawaii.
Over the centuries, with development of agriculture and increased maritime trade, the kingdoms of the Malay world flourished into maritime regional powers.
Traders from Srivijaya went direct to China, but to the Middle East, they went through the Indian traders.
It was a world in which Malay seafarers sailed their vessels to ports on the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean.
By virtue of trading contacts with China, India and the Middle East.
Influenced by contact with neighbouring cultures, many of the Malay kingdoms adopted the Hindu religion. They were structured along the Hindu tradition of a king or Raja at the centre of concentric circles of power.
The basic character of the kingdoms would be Hindu-Buddhist, and that would be the beginning of the government based on the belief system. But it is believed that the Malayan in Sumatra and the Hindu in Java, they were not totally like the Indian Hinduism or the Indian Buddhism, with slight change and modification due to local belief, the local shamanism, which was part and parcel of the religious system then anyway.
Adaptation from animist, Hindu, and Buddhist beliefs resulted in a religious mixture or syncretism prior to the arrival of Islam. The vast majority of people kept their own local cults. Gradually, extreme forms of worship developed out of the cauldron of spiritual ideas. And the culture of the Cris grew out of this reality.
Tujuan Cris daun pandan ni, luar dia punya tu, pandan sarah ya. Pandan sarah ni ialah untuk dia orang makan darah. Maka apa kalau dia petikan, dia bersilap apa semua gitu, ni buat tari dia gitu, maka ada celah dia ke mana-mana dia duk gitu. Maka duk untuk mengamakkan pada orang ramai, untuk melawan, untuk naik dia punya darah, maka dia sangat gila. Makan darah dia lekat di sini. Makan darah, kalau makan darah ni, kalau dia orang mabuk darah berapa ramai pun dia nampak seorang ya.
The connection between weapons, maybe Cris for that matter anyway, and the idea of the spirit world will be within the weapon, it is used to create a kind of power for the human being to cajole, to appease, to get the cooperation of the spirit world in order perhaps to cure from disease, or maybe to ward off evils, intention within the spirit world, which may be trying to, I suppose, create some kind of chaos.
Now, when Islam came to the tip of the Sumatra island in 1292, we are told that the Achenese king, Teuku Ali, raised it up and said, "Praise be to God." It was never meant to thwart others or to use it as a utensil to kill in the first place.
For centuries, the Malays retained much of their earlier animist, Hindu and Buddhist beliefs held prior to the arrival of Islam in the 13th century. And aspects of these beliefs that were retained in the culture of the Cris were often rationalised into the Islamic worldview. The idea of the divine gift of iron, for instance, was easily translated into the Islamic sense. There is even a verse in the Holy Quran entitled Iron that says God brought down iron to test man's ability to use it for ill or for good. This spiritual approach to iron was readily accepted by the Malay ironsmiths. After all, the most prized material for making a crisp blade was meteorite iron. Meteorite iron has long been used in the creation of special cris. Rich in iron ore, meteors enter Earth's atmosphere by the thousands every day. Emerging from the heavens, a meteor enters the Earth's atmosphere, burning up gases and space dust, causing a bright flash in the sky. In most traditional cultures, this was greeted as a sign from the gods. People believed in the magical power of the Cris and those that possessed knowledge of that power. These powers granted the user all sorts of useful abilities, such as the power to heal, invincibility, and even the ability to fly. The Cris was often used for physical harm through supernatural practices, or what was once called tuju. In a tuju ritual, a pawan or shaman could kill from a distance. With the right invocations and spells, leaving one's footprints in the sand could be fatal. Having a life of its own, a special Cris could fly off on a killing spree. And a spiritually infused blade could warn its owner of danger by rattling in its sheath. Equally intriguing were tales that the Cris could transfer the sight of a blazing fire simply by pointing the tip of the blade to an alternative site. During colonial days in Malaysia, people were quoted to have seen fire from a burning shipping vessel transferred to the mainland simply with the use of a Cris. For centuries, tales of magical Cris have been passed down through the generations, carrying with them the drama of human tragedy reminiscent of those of Shakespeare. But probably none so dramatic and inspiring as the tragic story of Hang Tuah and Hang Jubat. Hang Tuah, the most illustrious warrior in Malacca, was the leader of a closely knit band of Malacca's finest warriors that included his childhood friend, Hang Jubat. As the Sultan's most trusted general, Hang Tuah was feared and respected throughout the Malay world, not least for his famed Taming Sari Kris. The Taming Sari Kris is probably the most treasured kris of all time. It is purported to be bestowed with magic, and legend has it that whoever is in possession of the kris would attain invincibility.
Dikatakan bahawa keris Taming Sari diperbuat daripada 20 jenis besi. Keris ini dipercayai mempunyai keserasian yang amat besar dan diperolehi oleh Hang Tuah.
A popular version of the legend is one where Hang Tuah is slandered by his enemies, and the Sultan Mansur Shah unthinkingly sentences him to death. Upon receiving his fate, Hang Tuah surrenders the Taming Sari Kris to the Sultan, a kris that later finds its way into the hands of Hang Jubat. But Hang Tuah's death sentence was never carried out because his executioner, the Bendahara, defied the Sultan's orders and hid Hang Tuah in a remote region of Malacca. On hearing the false news of Hang Tuah's execution, Hang Jubat, in a fit of vengeful rage, ran amok at the royal palace, causing the Sultan to flee in fear of his life. With the Sultan's warriors unable to challenge the more skilled Hang Jubat, the Sultan laments the demise of Hang Tuah, the only warrior that would have been able to defeat Hang Jubat. Hearing this, the Bendahara informed the Sultan that Hang Tuah was in fact still very much alive. Pardoned by the Sultan, he is ordered to retake the Taming Sari and kill his lifelong friend. By the end of the grueling clash lasting 7 days, Hang Jubat, exhausted and exasperated by his opponent's skill and determination, gives up the Taming Sari and challenges Hang Tuah to finish the fight. Hang Jubat, the lifelong friend and confidant of Hang Tuah, slain by the very man whose death he avenged.
Within the collection, the regalia of the Perak Sultanate, they believe that they are the inheritance of the Kris Taming Sari from Hang Tuah. Even though the legend of Hang Tuah itself mentioned that the Kris was lost somewhere in the sea or something like that anyway, but still there is a belief that this has been inherited by the Sultanate of Perak, because the Sultanate of Perak has a very direct link to the Sultanate of Malacca.
But as profound a cultural object as the Kris is, the defining moment of its birth is still something of a mystery. There are many theories as to the origin of its design. The meander or zigzag patterns found in nature could have inspired the classic wavy shape of the kris. Alternatively, our mixed sense of danger, fear, and fascination when confronted with a snake is another possible source of inspiration. The ancient Javanese assigned the first creation of the kris to their many legendary figures, such as Panji, the warrior king, or the ascetic Sunang Bonang, a Javanese mystic who is said to have drawn a kris out of a snake's mouth. In a region of the world prone to eruptions, it is not surprising that one such story tells of a volcano giving birth to the first kris. When one of the many volcanoes erupted, its lava flowed over and smelted iron ores were found in the surrounding mountainsides. It was from these raw materials that the first kris were most likely forged. Whatever the truth, cloaked in the mystery of time, it is perhaps appropriate that the kris's true origins remain unknown. Over the centuries, as the art of kris making developed and formalised, the artisans that mastered the art became highly regarded in Malay society. And despite regular upheavals in the Malay world, kris makers easily found new patrons. When the Majapahit Empire collapsed in the 15th century, many of the court artisans dispersed and regrouped under new patrons. Many moved to Sumatra and the island of Bali. Over time, descendants of these craftsmen came across to the Malay Peninsula. Sultan Baginda Omar invited many such craftsmen and women to Terengganu in northeast Malaysia in order to establish a manufacturing class. Some of them were ironsmiths, highly regarded for their skills and esoteric knowledge in making special, spiritually charged kris blades. Many were woodcarvers, with skills in making kris hilts, whose traditional forms had been handed down for generations. Today, kris making is still being practiced by skilled craftsmen throughout the Indo-Malayan archipelago. Despite the rapid modernisation of the country in the latter half of last century, one can sometimes to this day still find the same cylindrical type of bellows, made from hollowed-out tree trunks, being used for kris making in some parts of Malaysia. Haji Noor still makes the kris hilt in the same way that his ancestors might have done centuries ago.
Saya kerja, dia budak lagi. Saya kerja ukit tu. Ni. Tak tahu berapa tahun.
Haji Noor still makes the kris hilt in the same way that his ancestors might have done centuries ago. An ingenious yet simple instrument for drilling is used to make a hole in the wood from which he will carve, often from memory. The hilt is often made from the aromatic cumanin wood, chosen for its relative softness and decorative grain. The final piece is then polished using memplas leaves, bringing out the fine texture in the wood. Kris blades are usually narrow and have a wide asymmetrical base. The blade is made from different iron ores and often contains nickel. A bladesmith, or empu, makes the blade in layers of different metal. While the forging of a crisp blade can take as little as a few days to perform, the forging of a special or auspicious kris, such as those with toit, is a much more complex and lengthy undertaking. The making of such a blade can take up to 30 years or more to make. Pak Abu, a crisp maker who can trace his roots to the Majapahit ironsmiths, forges his blades between the time of the dawn prayer and the midday prayer. The iron is forged a set number of times and on days traditionally considered auspicious, such as the 14th day of the month that falls on a Tuesday. In kris law, numbers are important, and as such, a kris is made according to numerical systems. Made to measurements in keeping with its purpose, we can find out about a kris through certain measuring systems.
Dia kata nak bawa besi, kena ukur dengan tangan. Cara gini mula dah. Kita letak ibu tangan gini, kita letak di bawah sini. Di mata, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah. Bismillah, Alhamdulillah. Bismillah, Alhamdulillah. Bismillah, Alhamdulillah. Bismillah. Jadi apa kalau kita ukur dengan tangan kita, ibu jari kita, kalau jatuh pada Bismillah, bawalah berjalan, dia kata. InsyaAllah, halangan tidak ada menentang kita. Kalau Alhamdulillah, taruhlah di rumah. Walaupun dia jenis emas sekalipun, taruh di rumah. Tak ada guna.
Not so long ago, the skills and knowledge of kris making was in real danger of being lost. But today, there's been something of a revival, and a new generation of kris artisans has emerged.
Saya Muhammad Syahid bin Mat Shah, dilahirkan di Selangor pada tahun 1988. Saya belajar kris ni daripada datuk saya, di mana dia seorang pembuat kris, dan dia mengajar saya cara bagaimana untuk menghasilkan ukiran-ukiran yang unik dan mempunyai maksud-maksud tertentu pada kris itu. Dan kris yang pertama saya buat adalah ini. Kris ini dibuat pada 6 tahun yang lepas. Kris ini dipanggil kris semenanjung dan mempunyai hulu yang dipanggil ayam teleng yang seakan-akan Jawa demam, dan mempunyai sampir dan sarung yang agak lebar. Besinya mempunyai 3 lok dan mempunyai lurah. Besi ini dipanggil besi melela dan ia melambangkan keunikan keris semenanjung. Keris selalunya dibuat sarungnya melalui belahan kayu. Belahan kayu yang diketam rapi menjadi rata dan ditangkup untuk menjadi sarung. Dan sampirnya merupakan daripada sebongkah kayu yang ditebuk dan dibentuk sehingga menjadi bentuk-bentuk tertentu yang memaparkan imej keris tersebut. Apa yang menarik minat saya dalam seni pembuatan keris ini adalah ukiran dan bentuk yang tertentu yang memaparkan kebolehan dan kehandalan seseorang tukang keris itu dalam seni pembuatan keris tersebut.
For centuries, the spiritual and physical process of making a kris has resulted in its unique beauty that has intrigued collectors and scholars the world over. The act of folding the different metals creates beautiful patterning in the blade, known as pamua. The pamua are unique, like fingerprints. Each patterning can never be repeated exactly. It is this that gives a kris blade an almost human-like identity. And it is perhaps not surprising that a kris has often been seen as having a living presence. But it is the final process of immersion of the blade in an acid solution for 3 days and nights that its identity and its unique patterns actually appear. The chemical reaction and corrosive acids reveal the areas of the many different metals forged, darkening some and lightening others. All this, however, does not necessarily ensure that a kris will become special.
Tapi nak cari keris tuah tu payah. Payah keris masa tu. Nak jatuh dia bila keris tuah ni jatuh dalam bintang Bustari. Dalam Bustari. Bustari saat ni dia ada 7. Sehari semalam 24 jam dia ada 7 kali dalam Bustari. Tapi kita tak tahu semasa mana Bustari.
Pak Hamzah has been collecting kris and assorted Old World Malay artefacts for many years. He's become something of an expert on the techniques used to identify quality specimens, as his assistant Zayed Zain explains.
The balancing of kris is just to show that the weapon is stable and made from good ingredient of iron. So at a certain point, the kris can stand by itself, by anybody. If you had a proper training, by anybody. To forge the kris, you need a certain degree of temperature to forge a kris. So when the kris is well forged, you get a very balanced kris. So that's why you can, some kris easily can be stood up, some cannot. So it depends on the kris. Actually, we just like to show that to the world that kris is among the stable weapon and the light weapon that Malay have.
Over the years, Pak Hamzah has collected a variety of kris, ranging from the brutal to the sublime.
This one is we call as Kinata Karongan, because Karongan is for this design. This one is not for fighting, kris. This one is for ceremony. This one is supposedly gift to from the Sultan of Mataram to his fighters that won the war. So eventually the kris is also just a plain kris, but the king of Mataram put it this symbol to appreciate his warriors for the winning of the war. Kris is known for the secondary weapon in the actual combat. The the main weapon is the spears, and they have the arrow. So they have the sword. That is the main weapon. So the kris is the secondary weapon. If you lose the main weapon, then you brought your kris.
In the past, a kris maker might have waited to finish his work under the special light of the full moon, a symbol of perfection to the traditional Malay. The eclipse of the moon is said to be a time of mixed blessings and uncertainty, and thus a blade finished on such an occasion would retain the power of that brief, fleeting, dark moment. In nearly all traditional cultures, the cave is deemed to be a place for spiritual retreat. The ancient Malays believed that there exists a certain cave in the spirit realm that is home to all the kris of the world. This spirit realm is a shadow of our world and is still considered a real world by some traditional ironsmiths. There are also those that believe that some kris were made in caves, forged by the bare hands of ascetics in a state of trance. The method of kris making is known as pitchit, and the resulting kris is the kris pitchit. So to Old World Malays, the kris was a symbol of status, of the divine, and of identity. But it is this ability to represent its owner that empowers the kris in a rather unusual way. If a royal or dignitary wished to marry the daughter of a reluctant family, he could send his Cris to them as a forceful sign of his intentions. If, for one reason or another, a man could not attend his own wedding, his Cris can be substituted in his place. A Cris is even said to have sexual qualities. The end part of the sheath, called the buntut Cris, is the male part of the Cris and has a talismanic relationship to the pending or buckle on a woman's attire. They share a similar elliptical shape. A woman might also hide a small replica Cris in a niche behind the buckle to ward off personal harm. Different Cris of various designs are used for different purposes, and the Cris specially used for execution is known as the Cris Panjang.
Keris yang ketiga yang digazetkan oleh Sultan Melaka 1459-1477 iaitu keris pembunuhan. Jadi keris pembunuhan ni adalah istimewa, nama dia keris hulu kepiah Pak Haji. Kepiah Pak Haji ni mengatakan satu yang amanah, yang betul, yang tulen, yang ikhlas, tidak ada percakapan yang bohong.
The executioner will stab the Cris in the shoulder, and then they put some cotton here, and then they are stabbed here and through the heart. So why they use the cotton? Because when they strike back the Cris, so the blood will not spill.
There are many Cris that were made purely for talismanic purposes. A particularly unusual talismanic Cris is the Cris Madu. It weeps drops of honey-coloured liquid that never dry up. It is said to bring its owner a prosperous and harmonious home. Latif Long is the seventh in a generation of woodcarvers who can trace their roots to the golden age of the Malay kingdom of Patani. Having grown up with the Cris culture all his life, he is one of the few veteran Cris makers remaining today with a wealth of knowledge in Cris lore.
Selalunya kalaulah raja-raja nak pergi ke hutan iaitu memburu rusa ke apa semua, selalunya keris ini dibagikan pada permaisuri ataupun isteri. Dan ada pula dia punya kata-kata dia semasa dia nak tinggal kepada isteri dia. Dia ada bergurai senda iaitu dia ada satu patung. Dia serah kepada isteri dia, permaisuri, mengatakan Cris tajung selimbar lepas jatuh di kaki, kaki tak luka. Peluk cium tekan napas jatuh ke hati, hati tak lupa. Baru dia bagi kepada permaisuri, ya. Permaisuri telah pegang keris ini, menemakan keris daripada raja. Dia kata tanah sawah di tengah padam, tempat orang menanam padi, walaupun tak nampak badan kanda budi yang baik dibawa mati.
Like anything of value, a Cris must be looked after. From time to time, it must be ritually cleansed and protected against its enemy, rust. Lime is used if heavy cleansing is needed, otherwise the juice of a coconut will do. In the old days, a hollow cylinder made from bamboo was used in the cleansing ritual. However, in the modern era where it is difficult to find such bamboo cylinders, any slim glass container long enough to soak the blade of the Cris will suffice. It is left soaking in this for a short while and then rinsed. Lastly, the blade must be smoked using incense. Traditionally, kumenyang, the Malay frankincense, would be burned. But not all Cris are deserving of such loving care. There are many cases of Cris causing supernatural disturbances and mischief. One way of getting rid of an abominable Cris is to bury it in the ground or under rocks at the base of a tree.
If the owner and the Cris supposed to be in concordance with each other, so that he would be able to mobilize the weapon for his own protection and for his own enhancement of his power. But if the Cris is not in concordance with his psychology, with his spirit in him, then probably the weapon would not be there, or the weapon would be dangerous for him. So normally someone with that kind of ruby have to dispose the Cris, or at least to undergo certain ritual to cleanse the Cris.
But even then, there is no guarantee a Cris will behave itself. In one widely told tale, a man goes walking when he hears an eerie voice out of the blue, urging him to go to a certain place, where there was something waiting especially for him, buried in the ground. As if drawn by a force, the man goes to the place and begins to dig. But little did he realise that what he had found was a cursed Cris.
Untuk kita nak buat daripada kita pakai keris yang kuaka, maka ada beberapa cara. Kalau setengah pada setengah tu dia bubuh atas kaki. Bubuh di atas kaki dan dia pacok di atas batang pisang. Dia peranyuk di atas kaki. Dia pergi, dia lepas dengan kata-kata dia tu adalah pesanan-pesanan dia. Yang keduanya dia kambuh dalam tanah.
A Cris was handed down as a family heirloom, along with the colourful stories of its own unique history.
Man, dah buat apa nak Cris tu?
Some stories have become national legends, while others explain a family's history and heritage, handed down through the generations from father to son and mother to daughter. Each Cris has its own story to tell.
Well, this is what we call the Crisp Osaka. This is the inheritance of the father or the great-grandfather to the son to the grandson. Okay, normally this kind of Cris is either kept properly and wrapped with yellow cloth or whatever, and put either in a box or something, or in a safe place. But they were also practiced during the early part of this century, where such Crisp Osaka is tied around what is called the tiangsi, the central pole of the house. So within the Malay house there is the central pillar, and the Cris are always tied within around that pillar. So it is a kind of protection for the family, and it is a kind of heritage for the family, and for that matter, the father would pass it almost ritually to the son to keep it. And normally it is kept properly as part and parcel of the inheritance of the family.
The culture of the Cris is steeped in what can often be seen as superstitious beliefs. But these beliefs evolve out of the real experiences of ordinary people and have an important place in their traditional life. The true story of the ruby, the Cris and the frog is steeped in symbolic language. While cleaning his fountain, Chekgu Norden, an avid Cris collector, sees a clump of frog spawn. As he tries to remove it, he sees something unusual inside it. It looked like a precious stone, perhaps a ruby, a symbol of the other world of spirits. About 2 years later, a young man came to the house to show him a Cris. As he opened his bag to retrieve the Cris, a frog suddenly jumped out and sat on the edge of the bag. Then, as if nothing happened, the young man put the frog back into the bag, where it stayed. Chekgu Norden ended up keeping the Cris, but to this day he can't stop thinking of what happened. The ruby in the frog spawn, the frog in the bag, and the Cris all seem to be connected. But in what way? Is it true that a person can attract a Cris, and vice versa? Part of the belief surrounding the culture of the Cris is that a Cris will find and make its way to the person it wants to be with, or with whom it has some connection.
Kita nak angkat Cris, cara kita nak angkat Cris. Kita tarik mata, Tarik mata kita letak sini dulu. Sesuai ke dengan aku bagan ni? Lepas tu kita letak di kiri, sebelah rusuk. Apabila letak sebelah rusuk, rusuk yang penghabisan dia pendek sebelah kiri kan, dipanggil rusuk Adam kan. Kita letak situ saja, dia naik selalu ni. Dia naik selalu ni. Maknanya bagan ni sesuai dengan kita. Tapi cara sesuai ni kita tengok pula. Rasa ni sampai hujung jari ke, sampai pusat ke atas ke, sebelah kanan kiri tak ada ke, kita ada rasa.
It is often said that the spirit of the Cris can be felt by those gifted with the knowledge of the unseen. It can often be brought for verification to those who are in touch with the spirit world. The belief is that the innocent, like young children, the mute, and the blind, can see this world. In one such case, a blind man could see the horrific history of a Cris presented to him. The Cris was correctly verified as having shed the blood of victims too numerous to imagine. Even though blind, he could sense their unspeakable pain and horror. The Cris may no longer be an important part of a man's dress code, its magical status assigned to horror film and pulp fiction. But still, in many parts of Malaysia, including the modern city of Kuala Lumpur, belief and curiosity in the whole talismanic culture of the Cris endures. Because the Cris is a weapon and no longer a lawful object to carry, the talismanic stone and the small replica Cris have become popular. As an enduring icon, the Cris has not only entered the realms of popular culture, but is also reinvented in the socio-cultural and political arena.
The Cris is not only historically significant, it is also culturally as well as nationally regarded as a symbol of virility, strength, wisdom, as well as defense. To many people, the Cris is only symbolized as an item or a weapon to thwart others, which is not totally correct.
The importance of the Cris in the lives of the early Malay community, as well as those of royalty, is evident even today, and can be seen as an important part of the attire and regalia of the present-day sultans.
Even the Yang di-Pertuan Agong symbolizes himself when he ascends the throne with the long Cris, or the Cris Panjang, which is silhouetted with gold, embroidered in the craftsmanship of old, done by Kelantanese, and it has been there ever since.
So as an icon of Malay identity, of warriors and kings, of myths and legends, the Cris is more than just a weapon. Throughout the centuries, it has evolved and survived as part of the oral narrative tradition of a culture. And because it is part of that tradition, much of its history is bound to be lost in the impermanence of speech. So although the true story of the Cris may remain fragile and subject to debate, it remains as enigmatic as ever, with much of its stories and history lost to time.